coming to you from Odie's Doghouse Studios. It's time for Positive News with your host, Crazy Panda 420.
Back, everybody, to another round of Positive News, your weekly reminder that the world is still full of good things, weird things, wholesome things, and the occasional moment where humanity collectively looks at the universe and says, yeah, we're doing our best. I'm your host, Crazy Panda 420, coming to you live from Odie's Doghouse Studios, where the coffee is strong, the vibes are stronger, and the studio dog is absolutely judging me from across the room. Honestly, fair. We're deep into that time of year where everyone feels a little cozier, a little louder, and a little more chaotic in the best possible way. So wherever you're tuning in from, wrapping in blankets, hiding from responsibilities, or just vibing from a couch with a snack, this is your space to breathe for a minute and let the good stuff rise to the top. And we've got plenty. Community highlights, global good vibes, a look at the bright side of the world, some stoner-friendly science that'll make your brain wiggle, a trip into gaming history, and of course, a reflective pause for thoughts to tie it all together. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to stick around after the outro for This Week in History, where we hop into the past just for the funsies. But before we dive into all of that, let's begin where we always do. Right here at home with the wonderful chaos happening around the doghouse today. On December 9th, 1922, according to the Library and Archives, Canada, and the Canadian Communications Foundation, the nation took its first step into a modern era with Canada's first commercial radio broadcast. The station was CFCF in Montreal, originally known by its wonderfully mysterious early radio call sign XWA, and on that December evening, they began regular commercial radio transmissions, something that had barely existed anywhere in the world at that point. North America was just beginning to understand what radio could be, and Canada jumped right into the frontier. Picture it. Before this, information traveled slowly. News came by newspaper, or word of mouth, or through crackling experimental signals that didn't always reach their destinations. Then suddenly, with this broadcast, people across towns and provinces were hearing the same music, the same updates, the same voices at the same time. It was the birth of a new kind of national connection, one that stretched across a country famous for being both enormous and scattered. This wasn't just entertainment, it was infrastructure. It changed how Canadians understood each other, how communities communicated, and how stories traveled. It's one of those rare moments where the world gets a little smaller in the best possible way. And that single broadcast helped light the path toward Canada's long tradition of public media, everything from early regional stations to the rise of the CBC, all the way through to the evolution into digital and streaming platforms we use today. A straight line can be drawn from that scratchy 1922 signal to the modern world where audio travels globally at the speed of Wi-Fi. It's wild to think that something so simple, a radio program crackling across the air, became the foundation of how nations tell their stories. But that's what happened this week in history. Alright, folks, let's roll into Global Good Vibes, the part of the show where we kick open the door, wave some sage around, and chase out the dooms so the good stuff has room to stretch. And this week, the world brought some genuinely uplifting energy. It's the kind of lineup that makes you think, hey, maybe humanity isn't completely cooked after all. 3 stories, 3 different corners of the world, and 3 reasons to breathe a little easier. Let's start close to home, and close to the dirt, in the best possible way. Michigan State University released reporting through the state news back in April of 2025 about something that honestly feels like it should have been obvious. But sometimes science just shows up to confirm with you grandma already knew. The story highlighted new research revealing the spending time in nature or even doing a little gardening is linked to lower stress or better mental health. Not just you feel kind of nice, but measurable reductions in anxiety, stress responses, and overall mental strain. Researchers found that when people were given access to simple outdoor environments, community gardens, small green spaces, plots of veggies in their backyard, their bodies responded in ways that mirrored therapy. Heart rates dropped, moods lifted, stress hormones eased up, and participants overwhelmingly reported feeling more connected to their environment and more grounded emotionally. You know that feeling when you stick your hands into the soil and it's a little cold, but in a way that reminds you that the earth is still doing its thing? Yeah, that turns out it's basically Mother Nature's version of unplugging yourself from mental USB port and plugging into something calm for a minute. And let me say this, if gardening is that therapeutic, someone needs to explain why every plant I've ever owned commits dramatic, soap opera level self sacrifice the moment I bring it home. But hey, apparently, if you're not me, plants are great for your health, and honestly, I love that for you. Alright, we're staying in the vibes of community, but now we're headed to Virginia, specifically Interstate 295 in Henrico County. Bam! Back in September 2025, according to verified reports from CBS News 6 in Richmond, WTVR, a car crashed and burst into flames. One of those moments where panic could have taken over, where people could have kept driving or waited for professionals to arrive, but that is not what happened. Instead, a group of total strangers, people who did not know each other, did not plan for this, did not wake up that morning expecting to be heroes, immediately jumped into action. Drivers pulled over, passengers ran toward the flames, folks from multiple vehicles rushed to help the trapped driver, forming an instant, unspoken rescue team. Some pried open doors, some worked to douse the flames, some called out instructions, and together they managed to pull the driver from safety before emergency responders even arrived. WTVR's coverage focused on the bravery and selflessness of the Good Samaritans, and it really hits a deep note. In moments of crisis, people often reveal their best selves, not because they're trained or because cameras are rolled or because they expect a reward, but because something in us still recognizes that if someone needs help and you can give it, you do. It's primal, it's human, it's community without the name tag. And we talk a lot on this show about how small actions can change someone's entire world. This, this was a big action. The kind that relights the timeline for a whole family. The kind that reminds us that courage is still alive and kicking, often in people we least expect. And to everyone who jumped in on that highway, you are the literal definition of good vibes. Now, for our third story, and this one comes from halfway around the world where the scale of solidarity is massive. On November 28th, 2025, Reuters reported on a devastating fire in Hong Kong, the deadliest the city has seen in decades. Dozens injured, families displaced, chaos everywhere. It was the kind of tragedy that can fracture a community, except it didn't. Within hours, hundreds of residents mobilized in one of the most powerful demonstrations of grassroots unity you'll ever hear about. Volunteers filled the streets carrying bags of food, water, diapers, clothing, first aid supplies, anything they could gather from their homes or local shops. People set up support camps on sidewalks. Some offered transport for displaced families, shuttling strangers across the city. Others organized blood donation drives at record speed. Social media exploded with coordination efforts. No arguments. It was all hands, all hearts, all help. And here's what gets me. None of it was centralized. No big organization made a call. No government order went out. It was everyday people looking at a disaster and saying, not on our watch, we take care of each other. In a city as densely packed and fast moving as Hong Kong. That kind of mobilization wasn't just impressive, it was deeply human. Reuters framed it as a powerful demonstration of civic unity, and that's exactly right. Because while the fire was heartbreaking, the response to it was a reminder that community doesn't just exist when things are easy. Often it shows itself most clearly when everything falls apart. And that thread right there, from the calm of the garden to strangers pulling someone out of danger, to an entire urban community rallying in the street. That's the global good vibe trifecta this week. Humanity healing itself in three totally different ways: one intentional, one instinctive, one overwhelming in scale. But each one a little beacon reminding us why we keep doing this show. Because even when the world feels loud and messy, there are always people growing something good, saving someone in need, or rushing into the night with nothing but a bag of supplies and a heart that says, let's go help. Some stories don't just lift your mood. They reach in and rearrange something inside you. And this week's Bright Side is one of those. It comes from People magazine, which reported on a reunion so powerful, it feels like the kind of thing you'd swear only happens in the movies. It begins decades ago with two infant brothers, Peter and Trevor. People.com reporting explains that Peter was literally snatched from his mother's arms at a train station and placed into foster care, while Trevor remained with their mother. From that single traumatic moment, their lives unfolded in completely separate directions. Different homes, different families, different decades, and for 50 years, neither had any idea where the other was, or even whether they were still alive. Imagine carrying that kind of silence around for half a century. Peter spent much of his life wondering. Trevor grew up unaware he even had a brother, and yet both of them felt the weight of something missing. That strange, quiet ache that comes from an unanswered question you've carried your whole life. Then, in 2025, everything shifted. Through the help of a program called Long Lost Family, Peter finally got a lead, a name, a location, and eventually a confirmation. Trevor was alive. They arranged to meet for the very first time in 5 decades. And here's the universe showing off a little. Their reunion happened on what would have been their mother's birthday. If that doesn't send a ripple through your chest, nothing will. When the brothers finally met, People.com described it as overwhelming in the best way. Peter said he felt an instant connection. No awkward pause, no slow warm-up, just that deep, instant recognition you can't fake or force. Two lives that had been split apart before either boy could speak suddenly, snapped back together like they were always meant to. And from there, they didn't waste a single moment. They shared stories, filled in blanks, introduced each other to children and grandchildren, discovered uncanny similarities, and made a mutual promise that no more lost years would pile up between them. After 50 years, for the first chapter, they determined to write the rest of the book together. People.com framed the reunion not just as an emotional but restorative. A piece of family history returned to the people it belonged to, and that is why this story sits on the bright side. Because the world can take things from us. Time can stretch further than we ever imagined, but sometimes, against every odd, life gives something back. Hope doesn't have an expiration date, and love doesn't forget its way home. Alright, brain cells, stretch out and hydrate, because it's time to once again go for Stone Science, the segment where the universe taps us on the shoulder and whispers, you have no idea how weird I really am. And this week, we've got two discoveries that feel like they were handcrafted specifically for people who look at space and the deep ocean and say, yep, that tracks. Let's start above us, way, way above us, with a cosmic discovery spotlighted by NASA science. Astronomers recently identified an ultra-massive white dwarf star that should not exist the way it does. Normally, a white dwarf in its just the final, quiet stage of a single star that's done all its exploding and glowing. But this one is basically a cosmic Frankenstein. Researchers found evidence that this ultra-massive white dwarf was actually formed by the merger of two different stars. Not a peaceful, giant, gentle merge either. More like two flaming celestial bowling balls slamming into each other at terrifying speeds and then deciding to fuse into one super dense stellar nugget. And the wild part? NASA's reporting suggests these kind of mergers might be far more common than anyone realized. So, somewhere in the galaxy, stars are out there having WWE tag team final moments, and we're just now catching on. It's humbling. It's also a reminder that the universe is not a static museum. It's a chaotic cosmic rave where things collide, collapse, and reinvent themselves constantly. And honestly, that kind of energy is inspiring. If two collapsing stars can reinvent themselves as something bigger and brighter, so can you. Now let's go from the extreme heights of space to the extreme depths of the ocean. Because apparently stone science is vertical this week. Science Daily recently covered a jaw-dropping discovery. Scientists exploring more than 6,000 meters deep found 14 brand new species. Not newly categorized, not reclassified, completely new to science. Among the discoveries were a record-settling mollusk with proportions that seem illegal, a carnivorous bivalve that sounds like something nature coded after a long weekend, and a parasitic isopod that I'm sure is adorable if you squint hard enough. These creatures survived in crushing pressure, freezing temperatures, and pitch black darkness, places humans couldn't even visit without technology that basically amounts to a reinforced metal beam. And yet, they are living, thriving, and doing their bizarre little deep sea things down there. The takeaway from that? We have explored so little of our oceans that Earth might as well still be loading its map textures. Every dive is a patch update. Every expedition is a new DLC drop. Science Daily's reporting makes it clear. The ocean is still the biggest mystery we've got. Together, these two discoveries, a star formed through cosmic chaos, creatures thriving in an alien world beneath our feet, remind us that existence is way weirder, wilder, and more creative than we give it credit for. And honestly, that's the kind of vibe stone science lived for. Alright gamers, welcome back to the Pixelated Time Machine. And today, we're taking a trip into one of the boldest, weirdest, and most influential experiments of the early 90s. The Sega CD. This thing wasn't just a console add-on. It was Sega standing up in the bedroom, cracking its knuckles, and saying, let's get weird. The Sega CD launched in Japan in 1991, North America in 1992, and Europe in 1993. And for the low, low price of $300, you could bolt this futuristic spaceship directly onto your Sega Genesis. What you got was a huge leap in what home consoles could do. Actual CD quality audio, animated narrative sequences, and the big selling point, full motion video, or FMV. Instead of pixel people yelling pixel things, the Sega CD offered real actors performing real scenes. Granted, those scenes were often compressed so heavily they looked like a surveillance tape filmed through a window covered in mayonnaise. But for the early 90s, revolutionary. Under the hood, the Sega CD was stacked. A 12.5 megahertz Motorola 68,000 processor, expanded RAM, Redbook audio support, and the ability to store far more data than cartridges ever dreamed of. Developers could suddenly build more ambitious, more cinematic experiences. The system didn't always stick to landing, but you could feel the ambition in everything it attempted. It was Sega, at its most, let's try something wild. And that brings us to the game that ended up defining the Sega CD's legacy more than anything else. Night Trap. Released in 1992 by Digital Pictures, Night Trap was one of the earliest attempts at an interactive movie. Instead of controlling a character, you controlled a surveillance system inside a house, switching camera feeds and activating traps to protect a group of teenagers from bizarre, slow-moving vampire ninja creatures. It was campy, cheesy, and honestly, more goofy than terrifying, but it showed exactly what FMV could be. Scenes played out in real time, actors reacted to your timing. It felt like a new kind of storytelling. But in 1993, Night Trap unexpectedly became the center of the US Senate hearings on video game violence alongside Mortal Kombat. It was dragged into a national debate about what kids were being exposed to. The irony, most of the criticism came from people who had never actually played it. They described scenes that didn't exist, inflated the violence, transformed silly FMV experiment into a supposed cultural menace. And yet, from that controversy came something large, the creation of the EOS RB rating system. The same ratings we still use today. Night Trap didn't earn its place in history because of its gameplay. It did so because the conversation around it reshaped how games were regulated and understood. But, as chaotic as that moment was, it actually captures the spirit of the Sega CD perfectly. The add-on wasn't safe, it wasn't conservative, it was experimental, unpredictable, and absolutely willing to fail spectacularly if it meant pushing the medium forward. And even though the Sega CD didn't succeed commercially, it changed gaming. It normalized cinematic cutscenes, CD audio, FMV storytelling, and larger, more ambitious game design. Night Trap, in its own funky way, showcased both the strengths and weaknesses of early CD-based gaming. It pushed the boundaries of what game could be, even if the technology wasn't fully ready to support the vision. And decades later, its cult status reminds us that innovation often looks strange before it looks brilliant. So, here's to the Sega CD, the wild experiment that paved the road for the PlayStation era. And to Night Trap, the little FMV game that accidentally rewrote gaming history. You know, the more stories we cover on this show, the reunions, the bravery, the communities pulling together, the more it becomes impossible to ignore a simple truth that sits right at the center of everything. Time with the people we love is the most valuable thing we will ever get. And it is also the thing we are the quickest to assume will always be there. Life has a way of slipping into fast forward when we aren't paying attention. Days blur, schedules overflow. We promise ourselves we'll call someone tomorrow, or visit soon, or make plans when things slow down a little. And then one day, you look up and realize weeks have passed, or months, or years, and you're left wondering how many quiet moments got swept away in the current. But here's the beautiful part. It doesn't take a grand gesture to change that. It doesn't take plane tickets or elaborate plans. Sometimes it's as simple as sitting on the couch with someone without rushing off to the next thing. Sometimes it's sending a text just to say, hey, I was thinking about you. Sometimes it's taking 5 minutes to listen, really listen, to someone who needs to feel heard. Cherishing time doesn't mean you have to live like every moment is some dramatic movie montage. It just means noticing the people who matter while they're still here to be noticed. A conversation, a shared meal, a laugh that hits a little too hard, a story you've heard more times than you can count, but this time you realize you're grateful you get to hear it again. And if there's anything in this episode that has shown us something, from brothers reunited after 50 years to communities stepping up when it matters most, it's the connection is the thread that keeps us human. We don't get unlimited chances. We don't get unlimited hours. But we do get to choose how we spend that time we have and who we spend it with. So maybe this week, take a moment to slow down, reach out to someone you care about, Make time for the people who feel like home, because someday those little ordinary moments are going to be the ones you wish you could relive. Cherish them now while they're happening. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of another episode of Positive News, the cozy corner of the internet where the world slows down just long enough for us to notice the good that's still happening all around us. If something in today's show made you smile, or think, or just exhale a little deeper than usual, hold on to that, carry it forward, let it ripple out into your day in whatever way makes sense for you. Every week, I'm reminded that the stories we tell here aren't just headlines. They're reminders of what we're capable of at our best. People showing up for each other, communities stepping in where systems fall short, scientists exploring the parts of existence that still feel like magic, and all of us, in our own messy, human way, try to stay connected to something gentle and hopeful in a world that doesn't always make that easy. So, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and don't forget to make time for the people who make your world feel a little lighter. You never know how much those moments might end up meaning. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for supporting the doghouse, and thank you for choosing to spend a little slice of your day with me. We'll be back next time with more good vibes, more wild science, more gaming history, and more reasons to believe that kindness still wins. And if you're watching on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of This Week in History. For now, this has been Positive News, and I've been your host, Crazy Panda 420. Stay warm, stay kind, and I'll see you soon.